Hi, boys and girls. Today we are going to be working on our new story called Seeing Stars. And this week we're going to have a brand new target skill, a skill that we have not talked about yet this year. And that target skill, boys and girls, is called graphic sources, or you might hear someone call it text features. Now, although we have not talked about graphic sources before, I am sure when I start discussing the items that are within graphic sources, I bet you have heard of many of these before. So I'm going to go through graphic sources, and we're going to talk about the different types of graphic sources that you're going to encounter. Now, what are graphic sources? Graphic sources, boys and girls, just help you understand the information that is in the text, that's in the story. And it gives you extra information. We see graphic sources in our expository text, in our nonfiction or our informational text. And I'm going to give you a few examples. Okay. If I, for instance, take this book, Monkeys, this is an expository text. It's informational. All of this information in this story is true. It's facts. Okay. Now, this, boys and girls, is a table of contents. I know that your teacher has talked to you about what a table of contents is. Now, a table of contents gives me all the chapters, and it tells me what chapter that starts on, or what page that starts on. So if I want to talk about monkey business, I know that I can go to page 4, and that's where that begins. If I wanted to see friends and family, I know that that starts on page 26. So this is a table of contents. Boys and girls, that is one graphic source. Okay, so you have heard of graphic sources. You might not have heard the word graphic sources, but I guarantee you've heard many of these items that I'm going to start discussing. We'll come back to this book. So the first thing is table of contents. I just showed you a table of contents. It's a list of the book's sections or chapters and their page numbers. So again, this gives you an example of a table of contents. So introduction, page 1. If I wanted to talk about the diet of an animal, I would go to page 8. Just like I showed you in the Monkeys book, it has a table of contents. Okay? Another graphic source, boys and girls, would be a timeline. Now, I know you know what a timeline is because in 2nd grade, you had to create your own timeline. Okay? Timeline has to do with events. It has to do with time, years, maybe days. So a timeline is a list of events that you put in order of occurrence. So you put them in the order from when it happened. So for instance, this example of a timeline says the life of George Washington. If you look at from the left, you see that in 1732 he was born. Okay? Now, after that, it would go to something else, but a time that is later than when he was born. It actually gives the next date is 1759 of when he is married. So your dates continue to go up until 1799 is when he passed away. So a timeline is in order of occurrence. It's in order of when it happens. Okay? It's like sequencing. Another graphic source would be a map. I know you've seen maps before. We've looked at maps in social studies, and a map is just a drawing or a picture showing selected features of an area. So it's just showing me this continent. It's showing me features. If I would look at the United States map, I would be able to see all the different 50 states. Maybe it would list their cities. Okay, you could even look at a map of Lima, Ohio. So it's a drawing or a picture showing different parts on that map, different areas. Another graphic source is a photograph or an illustration. Now, here's the difference between a photograph and an illustration. A photograph would be a real life picture, okay? So this is a photograph. It's real life, okay? This would be a photograph. It's real life picture. An illustration is a drawing that relates to the text. So it would be a drawing that relates to the text. So for instance, this would be an illustration, okay? This would be an illustration. This would be a photograph because it's a real life picture. So we have a photograph is a real life picture and an illustration is a drawing, okay? Is a drawing. Our next one is a caption. A caption is a brief description that accompanies an illustration or a photograph. So right here you have the photograph, and then this would be the caption. The male lion sleeps 18 to 20 hours a day. Okay? Now, I know you've seen this because when we read Amazing Bird's Nest, okay, that had captions, that had photographs, and I'm sure your teacher pointed those out. Where else do you think you have seen these things? Where else do you think you have seen captions and photographs or maps? Yeah, in your social studies book, boys and girls, we see all of this in our social studies book as well. If I look at Amazing Bird Nest, this was our story from a few weeks ago. Here would be my photograph, and right here would be my caption. This caption is a description that describes this photograph. It's telling me what's happening within that photograph. Okay? Okay, another word, boys and girls, is called glossary. Now, a glossary is just a list of words and their definitions. It's found at the end of a book, okay? So it's found at the end of a book. So for instance, in my monkey book that we were looking at before, this isn't quite what a glossary would always look like, but this would be an example of a type of glossary. This has vocabulary words. In this case, it has 6 vocabulary words. And it tells me the definition of those vocabulary words. So it's like a dictionary, but a glossary would be at the end of your book. The next one, boys and girls, is called a heading or a subheading. So a heading is a title, and a subheading is a word or phrase, sentence, or question that highlights a key point in a section. Okay, so lions in the wild would be like a heading. So here, for instance, boys and girls, an Amazing Bird Nest, amazing birds, that would be a heading. Even more stuff, that would be a heading. And when we read our social studies books, boys and girls, that has many headings as well. Every time you go into a new section, that would be a new heading. It's like a title. Our next one, boys and girls, for our graphic source would be a diagram. So this is a picture of what? Very good. It's a picture of a lion. And a diagram just labels the illustration, and it helps us explain it. If I didn't know what this was, this part of the lion, a diagram would help me. That's called the mane. The mane, okay? So the lion's mane would be the hair around the lion, okay? Specifically the male lion. Now I have the body. This would be called a body. I have the paws, and I have the tail. Okay, so that, boys and girls, would be a diagram. Okay, that would be a diagram. Okay. Another one, boys and girls, is called bullet points. So these little dots right here, these are called bullet points. It just lists important information that's found in the text. Sometimes when you do, excuse me, sometimes when you might do a graphic organizer, maybe when you're writing your thoughts, okay, before you begin writing your complete sentences, you could make bullet points. You could make bullet points for every bullet point that might be a thought, okay? So this says lions are carnivores and hunt the following animals, and this just lists the following animals that they hunt. It's just bullet points: wildebeest, impalas, zebras, warthogs, antelopes. So those are called bullet points, those right here. Okay, the next graphic source would be called an index. So an index is an alphabetical list of important subjects in the text and their page numbers. So, for instance, if I wanted to look up, if I'm looking at this, if I wanted to look up the word hunting, okay, I know I read something about hunting, but I'm unsure of the page. Well, I could go to my index and I could look up the word hunting. It goes in alphabetical order. That means it goes from A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on, okay? And I could look up hunting, and I could see that hunting, it talks about hunting on page 8, okay? So an index, an alphabetical list of important subjects that are in the text, and it says the page numbers that it talks about, okay? So it gives you all the page numbers that it talks about for that subject, excuse me. All right, so many graphic sources, but I promise you, I'm sure you have already heard of a lot of these before. Okay, our next one is keywords. Now, I know you have heard of keywords before, boys and girls, because we actually see them in our reading textbooks, okay? We also see them in our social studies books. The words are important because a lot of times you'll see them highlighted. We see a lot of highlighted vocabulary words in our reading textbook. Those are key words. They're important. They're emphasized words or phrases. You might also see them in bold, which means that they're darker black. You might see them in italic, which means they're slanted sideways a little bit. You might see words that are underlined, maybe colored, or capitalized, or even highlighted, okay? So, for instance, if I look at this page, I know that this screams important because it's highlighted. It's very important because it's highlighted. So that would be key words. And the last one I have for you today would be a chart, okay? A chart. I know you've seen this because we've talked about bar graphs in math. So it's a chart. It gives information in the form of a table or a list, a diagram, or a graph. So that would be a chart, okay? Okay, so boys and girls, I know I gave you a lot of information right there in a short amount of time, but you will have no problem understanding this once we get started. So all of that information that I just went through, those are all different types of graphic sources. Okay, and remember, graphic sources give us information. It helps us better understand the text. It helps us better understand what we're reading with all the extra information. So what I need you to do is I would like you to go get your reading textbooks. You will need to turn to page 443. And you will need a scrap piece of paper and a pencil. So go ahead and pause the video and go get those items. Okay, here we are. We're on page 443. We're going to be reading a story called Patterns in the Sky, and we're going to be filling out a graphic organizer together, okay? And it's about graphic sources. So remember, graphic sources help us understand the information that's in the text. It gives us extra information so we can better understand what we're looking at or what we're talking about, what we're reading. Okay, so as I read you Patterns in the Sky, I want you to look for those different types of graphic sources that I just showed you. Okay, all those different types of graphic sources. There are a few different types of graphic sources within this story, and let's see if you can kind of figure out what those different types of graphic sources are. Okay, so patterns in the sky. Patterns in the sky. Constellations. Long ago, people looked up at the night sky and noticed patterns in the stars. They gave these patterns names, such as Libra and Pisces. Today, we call these patterns constellations. So if you look over here, how many of you have actually looked up in the sky? On a clear sky night, you can see the stars, and you have seen the different patterns in the sky. Maybe one of the patterns that you might have heard of or looked at in the sky is maybe the Small Dipper or the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper, the Big Dipper. Okay, it's like a big ladle. A ladle is like a soup spoon. Okay, if you look over here, it's very, very lightly, but you can see a constellation, okay? So like these would be the stars, the brighter dots are the stars, and then what they do is they connect them, okay? And this constellation is called Libra. So that's a constellation. Right here it says the name Libra, okay? Think about that graphic source. I just pointed out a graphic source for you. Let's go on to our next heading, the Big Dipper. The Big Dipper is a star pattern that has inspired many stories. The 7 stars of the Big Dipper are part of a constellation called Ursa Major. It is one of the most recognizable patterns in the sky. People have told stories about this group of stars for hundreds of years. So that's that Big Dipper that I was talking about, that soup ladle that I was talking about that you may have seen in the sky. If you haven't, try to look for it on a clear, starry night. I guarantee you'll be able to figure it out. Other names. Many of the names of constellations come from old stories. Hercules is named after a brave hero from a Greek story. Leo is named for a lion with skin so strong that no weapon could harm it. Where to find them? One reason that constellations were given names was for people to remember them. This helped people long ago understand how the movement of the earth was connected to the seasons. So boys and girls, I showed you all those different graphic sources at the beginning of the video, and we actually saw some graphic sources within our story. So what we're going to do is we are going to fill out a graphic organizer, and this is what it looks like. So if you're at home, I know you don't have this paper, and that's okay. If you just grab a scrap piece of paper, and you can follow along with us on your scrap piece of paper. If you're here in school, I'm sure your teacher will be handing this out to you. So here's our graphic sources paper. We're going to try to find the type of source that we saw in the text that we just read. So thinking about all those different graphic sources that I showed you and we discussed, can you see or remember any of those graphic sources in our story? What do you think? What is one graphic source that you may have seen or heard me talk about in our text? Well, let me give you a clue. What about this right here? Does anybody remember, if I point to Libra, does anybody remember what that's called? Or this? What is this called? What do you think? What do you think? Well, I can tell you, boys and girls, that this is a photograph, okay? This is a photograph. That is actually a picture, a photograph of the constellation Libra. So we are going to write the type of source would be a photograph. Now, Libra would be the caption. That Libra, that remember the caption explains what that photograph is or explains what's happening in the photograph. And in this case, this photograph is the constellation Libra. So I've chose to, let's just write the type of source is photograph. So go ahead and write photograph for the type of source it is. That's the graphic source we're talking about, is this photograph, this constellation. And boys and girls, in that first paragraph, it talks about the names of some constellations. It talks about the Libra and the Pisces. Those are constellations. And it demonstrates an example of what one of those constellations is in that photograph. It's kind of hard to see it in my book, so you need to look at it in your book. It's very difficult to see it on my video. Now, what does it show? What does it show? What does this photograph show? Well, boys and girls, it shows the photo is labeled Libra. It shows the constellation Libra. Okay? So the photo shows the constellation Libra. Okay, so yeah, that photograph is showing the constellation Libra. We know it's Libra because of the caption, because it's labeled Libra. Let me see if I can't zoom in on that better. You can't really see my lines because of the black background, so I apologize. So you'll have to look at that constellation on your textbook. You can see it much better on your paper or on your book. Okay, so how does it help? Oops, I'm sorry. How does it help us? How did that graphic source, that photograph, help us? What do you think, boys and girls? What do you think? Okay, so how does it help? How did this graphic source, this photograph, how did it help us? Boys and girls, did it help you understand what a constellation is? Did it help you understand what a constellation could possibly look like? Absolutely. So it helps me understand. Go ahead and write what I'm writing. What a constellation pattern looks like. I'll give you a minute to go ahead and write that. So boys and girls, graphic sources help you understand the information more clear, better. So this photograph, if you were just reading the text and you came across the word constellation, you might not have even known what a constellation was. Maybe that was the first time you even heard the word constellation. But having a photograph, the graphic source of a photograph, and seeing it helps you connect the pieces. It helps you connect that, oh, that's what a constellation is, or that's what a constellation looks like. So graphic sources help us understand the text better. Okay, so what about another graphic source within this, in our story, Patterns in the Sky? What other graphic source do you see in our story? Look at something that's bold and black. There's 4 of them. What do you call these? What do you call those? Boys and girls, that is another graphic source. Those are called headings, okay? So those are called headings. Remember, headings help you figure out how the text is organized. So this heading, constellations, I know that this entire paragraph is going to be about what? Yeah, constellations. Here, the next heading is the Big Dipper. So this section of the text is going to be about the Big Dipper. So headings give us a lot of information about what we are going to be reading about. Okay, so headings is another type of a graphic source. So go ahead and write headings. That's another graphic source that we see in our reading. Okay, what does it show? What does it show us? What does headings show us? What do you think? I see constellations, I see the Big Dipper, I see other names, and I see where to find them. Those are my headings. That's what it shows. It shows the headings, and then I can list them. So it shows the headings. And now I'm going to list them. Constellations, the Big Dipper, other names, and where to find them. May have to write a little bit smaller. I'll give you time to go ahead and write that. So we just listed the 4 headings in our story. That's what it shows us. It shows the headings, constellations, the Big Dipper, other names, and where to find them. Now remember, headings, once I read that heading, I know that what I'm about to read has to relate to that heading. So all the information that I'm going to read goes back and relates to what that heading is. So where to find them, I know that what I'm about to read is where I can find the constellations. Okay? How does it help? How do the headings help me? Well, we just talked about. They help me know what I can expect to read about in each part of the text. That's exactly what headings do. So headings help me know what I'm expecting to read about in each part of the text. Okay? So you're going to write, helps me know what I can expect to read about in each, part of the text. I'll give you a minute to go ahead and write that. Okay, boys and girls, I threw a lot of information at you today. So our skill this week is graphic sources. There are many different types of graphic sources. I went through a whole list of the different types of graphic sources at the beginning of the video. So if you don't remember them, if you want to rewatch them, go ahead and restart that video over and you can see all the different types of graphic sources. Remember, graphic sources help you understand information that is in the text. It gives us extra information to help us better understand what we are reading, what our text is talking about. And I guarantee you, you have seen these graphic sources before. You just probably didn't know what their names were, or you didn't know that they were called graphic sources. So as you're reading throughout your text, if you get a nonfiction text or in your social studies book, in your reading book, see if you can find these different graphic sources. Right now, you can look in your reading book, see if you can find the table of contents. Does your reading textbook have a glossary? Does your reading textbook have an index? Can you find pictures, photographs, illustrations? Absolutely. You can do that just in your reading book. I'm going to show you. If I wanted to look at a table of contents, remember your table of contents is at the beginning. Oops, let me zoom out. Is at the beginning of your book. So if you would look at your table of contents, look, boys and girls, these are your contents. This is your table of contents. So let's try to find what page number Seeing Stars is on. That's our new story this week. So I'm going to keep on looking. Keep looking for Seeing Stars. What do you know? Right here, Seeing Stars. I can look in the table of contents and see that Seeing Stars begins on page 446. We just used a graphic source, boys and girls. We just used the table of contents. Okay, I'm going to flip to 446. Right here. What do you see? Here's another graphic source. Yep, that is a caption. This caption tells about my other graphic source, which is my photograph. Remember, you have a photograph, which is a real-life picture. You have an illustration, which is a drawing. This caption tells me information about what that photograph is. If you look on this page, I see words that are in boxes. That tells me that these words are important. They're key words. Those words have to be important, especially if they're putting a box around them. Well, let's see. Does your book have a glossary? Flip towards the back of your book. Does your book have a glossary? Here you go. Here's a glossary. Remember, a glossary is like a mini dictionary, okay? But this glossary in your book relates to words that are within these stories, okay? A dictionary has many, 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 many different words, all sorts of different words. This glossary relates to all the words in our story, okay? Vocabulary words that are within our textbook, okay? So this is a glossary. It gives us definitions of words, what words mean. So boys and girls, there are many different graphic sources within our textbook. All you have to do is go look at them and see if you can identify them, okay? You guys did a fantastic job today. Keep up the good work and go have fun identifying those graphic sources.